Hello, everybody. Wish I could be with you. Sadly, I'm nowhere near the subject of our conversation this time, which is California and Los Angeles, which used to be my home. And particularly, we're going to talk about Los Angeles through the eyes and words of two of Los Angeles's most wonderful and perhaps, well, there's so many famous writers from Los Angeles, but so many people who find their way to Los Angeles, find their way to Los Angeles quite often through the works of Joan Didion or Eve Babitz. And depending on which way you go, you wind up perhaps with a very, very different experience of Los Angeles. Um, Los Angeles is an enigmatic city, a city of dreams, a city of hopes, a city of aspiration, a city where anything goes and where anything can go wrong. It can be paradise. If you listen to the Beach Boys, maybe it's paradise found. It's sun and surf and sea. It's open top cars and groovy people and beautiful California girls. And we're surfing USA, wishing that we could all be there. But if you flip the album over and you listen to Jackson Browne, maybe you find Los Angeles as paradise lost, a place of broken dreams, weighted down with longing and yearning. And it's into this city that two women, two friends, two frenemies, perhaps would be a better description, Joan Didion and Eve Babitz, begin to hone and harness their creative abilities and create writing that has stimulated, entertained, challenged, provoked readers decade after decade after decade. And it's in the late 60s and in the 70s where both of these women um, get their start and leave their mark. And Los Angeles in the 1970s was much like it is today, really, a city of remarkable and marked contrasts, cultural vibrancy, social unrest, the Watts riots in the late 60s, all of the foment and the frustration of people living side by side in a city that's growing exponentially. There's smog everywhere, but there are also beaches and palm trees and sunshine. There's music, there's art, there's Venice Beach, there's bodybuilders and surfers and magicians and cyclists and musicians and artists, and there's Hollywood, and all of this is happening against a post-war boom that's turning into a post-war crunch, a time of economic and political change. And it's into this world that both Joan Didion and Eve Babitz emerged, these two iconic Los Angeles writers who are known for their distinct styles and their overlapping portrayals of the city and the cultures. And I say cultures, not culture, in the 60s and the 70s. Joan Didion, celebrated for her cool, detached observations and her explorations of the darker side of Los Angeles. Babitz, the opposite, the other end of the spectrum, her vibrant autobiographical account of the wilder hedonistic aspects, and their lives and work, though distinct, are intertwined. I mean, it's Joan Didion who gave Babitz her kickstart, really, and promoted her early work. But the two were opposites, and that played out in the difficulties and the challenges of their friendships. Babitz was an ex-girlfriend of so many people. I mean, at one point, Eve Babitz got severely injured, which in many ways is what brought about her untimely death. And I think it was Harrison Ford was one of the people that gave $100,000 towards her medical thing. But there were many paramours, and so she was an ex of the Doors frontman Jim Morrison. She was sexually prolific. She believed in the art of seduction, while Didion slept with only one man before she married her husband. Babitz was known for being voluptuous and direct, and Joan Didion was thin, thin to the point of emaciation, and given to these very long and pronounced silences. They're two writers, they have so much in common, and yet so little in common. And they both have a kind of narcissistic streak of small differences that run incredibly deep through their work. Didion is serious and disciplined, anorexic, controlling, quiet. She could be icy and arch, and so hungry for success that she would write even at the cost of living. And Babitz, the polar opposite, fun, hedonistic, buxom, erratic, loud, warm, funny, and so hungry for the experience of life that she would live large even at the cost of writing. Eve Babitz got her start quite young, on her search, perhaps her quest for the ladder of success. She was going out with a man who was one of the organizers and curators of the Pasadena Art Museum, which is now known as the Norton Simon Museum. And when she was 20 years old and going out with Walter Hopps, there was a party that was held at the Pasadena Museum, and it was celebrating a retrospective of the French conceptual artist Marcel Duchamp. And it's a moment of great importance for Los Angeles because even though Los Angeles is Hollywood and it's known for many things, it's not viewed, and to some degree it still isn't viewed as a sort of cultural capital, and cultural in the sort of highbrow sense of the world, the world of art and museums and stuff like that. Even though I think that's a complete and total misnomer. But this moment when Duchamp has this retrospective in Los Angeles, in Pasadena at the Pasadena Art Museum, is a key moment in the cultural history of Los Angeles. And it's what transforms, in some ways, Los Angeles from a kind of provincial outpost into a global cultural city. And there was a party to which Eve Babitz was not invited, but she went anyway. And she went with her parents, with her mum and dad. And here's a quote from an interview with her. She said, "I went to the public opening with my parents. It was very crowded and I drank red wine. Julian Wasserman, who was a photographer, came up to me and said, 'Hey, Eve, how about I take a picture of you and Duchamp and you'll be naked?' And I thought about it and I thought maybe it was the best idea ever. I mean, I was so mad at Walter for not inviting me. So here's this scenario. There's this grand party, and actually Walter Hopps is playing chess with Duchamp in this kind of theatrical elevated area. And Julian Wasserman, a provocative photographer, has this wild idea. Hey, Eve, how about I take a picture of you playing chess with Duchamp and you take your clothes off? And she just completely goes for this. And she goes for this because she's trying to assert something of her own personhood, her sexuality, and she's mad at her one of her boyfriends for not inviting her. So she strips off and she makes her first chess move, and apparently Duchamp checkmated her in a single move. And as she said, it's called Fool's Mate. And I was upset because I thought I had a chance because of my boobs, but I didn't. But this moment is what launched her on a sort of cultural trajectory. She was also featured in a magazine produced by the artist Ed Ruscha, or a kind of photo montage produced by the writer, the artist Ed Ruscha, for a magazine, and it was called Five 1965 Girlfriends. And in that, she was featured as one of Ed Ruscha's girlfriends. And for her, all of these sort of public explorations and expositions of her beauty and her femininity and her sexuality were an expression for her of her power. And of course, Eve Babitz wrote about her life. It was autobiographical, but she also wrote about Los Angeles. And, in both the work of Didion and Babitz, place, location, uh, count so much. And the city of Los Angeles features so large, it looms large, it haunts everything that they say and write about. In one of her stories, in fact, she says, one of the characters said, I wouldn't leave LA if the whole place tipped over into the ocean, Mary declared. And indeed, she only left Los Angeles on urgent business. She was too tough and too fragile for any place else. And that sentence, I think, too tough and too fragile for any place else, sums up something about Los Angeles for me. Um, there's a sense when many people think about Los Angeles, they tend to think about the surface stereotypes of the city. And Los Angeles is a city really easy to stereotype. It's full of so many classic stereotypes, the self-aggrandizing filmmakers, the people so full of themselves because they're creatives, the wannabe models, the hipsters, the hippies, the hey man cool dudes that hang out on Venice Beach. And there's an idea that LA is all surface and no depth, and everybody just floats around in this haze of sunshine. But it's worth remembering that the sunshine of Los Angeles leaves really dark shadows on the city. And rather than being a light-hearted place, Los Angeles is actually a very, very tough town. And that line that Babbitt puts in the mouth of her character Mary, she was too tough and too fragile for any place, I think sums up the dichotomy of not only what it means to be a subject and be a person, because we're all sort of tough and fragile at the same time, but also sums up what it's like to live in LA. LA makes you tough. If you go to Los Angeles and you're hoping to realize your dreams, what you will realize is that dreams don't come easy, and the city can be really, really tough on you, and resilience has to be built into your life. It's very easy, she said, to stand LA, which is why it's almost inevitable that all sorts of ideas get entertained. And again, she captures something of the spirit of Los Angeles. You can you can deal with LA. You can go there, and the sunshine is so appealing. You drive along the Pacific Coast Highway, and it's just mile after mile of breathtaking beauty. Um, Iconic beauty that we've seen littered across the decades in cinema as Los Angeles has been shown on screen. And it's no wonder that it sort of becomes kind of like a dumping ground for anything and everything. I mean, one of the wonderful things about Los Angeles is that you can literally find anything there. As mad as you can be, you can find something madder in Los Angeles. And you can pick a realm, you can pick religion, you can pick art, you can pick physical fitness. There's some mad new idea, and that's Los Angeles. It's a place where ideas just get entertained. People will accept them and make room for them and stuff like that. So Babbitt's in her writing captures something of the essence of the heart of Los Angeles and the dreamlike quality of living in the city. For Babbitt, in her writing, Los Angeles is about dream and desire and the pursuit of pleasure, of happiness, of hope, of dreams, and all those kind of things. And it's also a reflection of how she understands her own femininity and the femininity of women, how she sees women. Again, she writes in Slow Days, women want to be loved like roses. They spend hours perfecting their eyebrows and toes and inventing irresistible curls that fall by accident down the back of their necks from otherwise austere hairstyles. They want their lover to remember the way they held a glass. They want to haunt. So Babitz sees her femininity, her own sexuality, her own beauty, and her own attention to her looks as a kind of ghostly apparition with which to enchant, bewitch, bewilder, beguile her lovers. And then you switch over and you get Joan Didion. California, she writes, is a place in which a boom mentality and a sense of Chekhovian loss meet in an uneasy suspension, in which the mind is troubled by some buried but ineradicable suspicion that things work better here, because here, beneath the immense bleak sky, is where we run out of continent. So, in this really concise moment, Joan Didion encapsulates California, the boom mentality, the gold rush, the rush to Hollywood, the rush to celebrity, the rush to entertain. But she says underneath all of that is this kind of Chekhovian sense of loss, and you sort of live on this continuum of boom and loss, bust and boom. And the mind is troubled. And it's troubled not just by the prospect of loss, but really by the suspicion that somehow things fall together better in Los Angeles because there's nowhere else to go. As she says, underneath this immense bleached sky, we've run out of continent. We've come to the very edge of the American continent or the North American continent. And there we have this suspicion that there's nowhere else to go, but also that here things just work out better. It's hard for people who have not lived in Los Angeles to realize how radically the Santa Ana figures in the local imagination. The Santa Ana winds is what she's talking about. And given that this conversation is happening in the wake of the devastating fires that devastated and destroyed much of the heart of Los Angeles not that long ago, these words are timely and apropos. The city burning is Los Angeles's deepest image of itself. Nathaniel West perceived that in Day of the Locust, and at the time of the 1965 Watts riots, what struck the imagination most indelibly were the fires. For days, one could drive the harbor freeway and see the city on fire, just as we has always known it would be in the end. Los Angeles weather is the weather of catastrophe, of apocalypse, and just as reliably, the long and bitter winters of New England determine the way the life is lived there, so the violence and the unpredictability of the Santa Ana affect the entire quality of life in Los Angeles, accentuate its impermanence, its unreliability. The wind shows us how close to the edge we are. You know, it's really funny. What do they say about Los Angeles? It's got four seasons, um, fire season, pilot season, award season, and mud season. I think it is something like that. You know, this kind of thing that Los Angeles operates under a different seasonal aegis. And having lived in Los Angeles, people talk about the fire season and worry about the fires. And fires are looming because Los Angeles is hot and dry. There's so little rain that comes to bring moisture to the ground. And there's always this looming threat. And when the winds come up, those wild Santa Ana winds that are unlike there are different winds around the world. The winds that blow off the Sahara and blow that orange dust across the bottom of the Mediterranean countries like Spain and Italy. The wild winds that blow across the Atlantic. These winds that, like holy rivers, have their own character and their own sense of bringing something. And there is an apocalyptic element to life in Los Angeles, earthquakes, mudslides, because when it rains in California, when I lived in California, people and it rained, people would say, "Oh, doesn't this rain remind you of being home in England?" I'm like, "No, in England we get drizzle. It's like you just go out and you get damp. This is a rain that washes away houses and washes out roads and brings mud rivers down the canyons. Everything about Los Angeles, in a sense, is an extreme." And in two short paragraphs, Didion captures that aspect of the vastness of how Los Angeles exists in this bubble. And then Didion says this: "We tell ourselves stories in order to live. We look for the sermon in the suicide, for the social or moral lesson in the murder of five. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of multiple choices. We live entirely, especially if we are writers, by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images, by the ideas with which we have learned to freeze the shifting phantasmagoria which is our actual experience." So she talks about, and this is what I love about Didion. We we tell ourselves stories in order to live. We make up these stories. We look for these stories in things. We look for connections and dots to join up. They aren't necessarily there. I'm not sure actually that our lives are stories. I think we make up stories in order to better or to help us understand our lives. We look for social or moral lessons in tragedy and things like that, and we interpret what we see. It's an interpretation, and it's highly subjective, just like the way Babitz and Didion look at a city and look at themselves. They're both looking at the same place, but they see different things. They're both looking at themselves, but they see different things reflected back in the mirror. They saw different things in each other. And on all of that, we impose a kind of narrative line upon random images, really. And these ideas that we've learned, Didion says, we freeze them. We freeze our lives and we squeeze them into these stories, and it's what helps us to live. Babbitt's pursued celebrity and fame in a very freewheeling way. And she didn't really become famous. She became well known, but fame was something that eluded her a little bit. "I didn't become famous," she wrote, "but I got near enough to smell the stench of success, and it smelt like burnt cloth and rancid gardenias. And I realized that the truly awful thing about success is that it's held up all those years as a thing that would make everything all right. And the only thing that makes things even slightly bearable is a friend who knows what you're talking about." So here's someone who lives in a city where people chase celebrity and fame, and where it's held out like a carrot on a stick, to the entire world. Come to Hollywood, come to Los Angeles, realize your dreams, become famous, get a star on Hollywood Boulevard. Who doesn't want one? But having come close to it, Babbitt smells something. And what she smells is not the sweet fragrance of success, but a kind of burning, maybe a burning of the very core of subjectivity. And she says, here's what it comes down to. We've lived with this lie that success makes everything okay. But maybe what makes things even slightly bearable is simply a friend who knows what you're talking about. Culturally, LA has always been a humid jungle, alive with seething LA projects that I guess people from other places just can't see. It takes a certain kind of innocence to like LA anyway. It requires a certain plain happiness to be happy inside LA, to choose it and be happy here. When people are not happy, they fight against LA and they say it's a wasteland and other helpful descriptions, which I thought was a great line that when people say LA is a wasteland, she regards that as a kind of helpful description of what it's like. But again, she captures in an entirely different way, much like Didion did, the heart of what it means to be in the humid jungle, although LA is not particularly humid, but it's a jungle alive with ideas and projects and things that people who live in other places just simply can't see. They can't imagine. And she says, and it takes a kind of innocence. And I wonder sometimes if it's not like a childlike innocence that's required to live in somewhere like LA. Not to be childish, but to have this kind of openness and curiosity and expectancy that anything could happen, anything might happen, and perhaps anything will happen. And that possibility drives and staying open to that is what keeps LA young, because LA to me seems always like a young city. And then I'll end with this because you don't need to hear me waffling on too much. You've got plenty to talk about. Just a couple of quotes from Didion that I've always loved. I've already lost touch with a couple of people I used to be, which says a lot about how we might want to think about ourselves. I think one of the challenges with the times in which we live is this need that we seem to have to identify and label ourselves in particular ways. I think social media has a lot to do that. You know, you go on certain apps and everybody wants a profile and you have to sort of condense yourself down to, I am this, I am that, I am the other. But if you think about your own life and you go back a few years, you go, I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I wore that. I can't believe I went there or I did that. I think if we look at our lives, we realize that a bit like snakes, we shed skins and we lose touch with who we used to be in our 20s, our 30s, our 40s, or onward and upward. And then this quote, which I think in some ways probably sums up what I would say about both Didion and Babitz in their writing. I write entirely to find out what I'm thinking, what I'm looking at, what I see and what it means, what I want and what I fear. It's a really interesting approach because usually the idea is, well, you don't just write. You need to know what you want to write about. But having written what I'd say is you usually have an inkling of where you're going to start, but it winds up never being the place that you're going. And more often than not, you find yourself just in wild spaces doing things that you never imagined you'd be doing. And writing for Didion and for Babitz, they both wrote differently, which is a great lesson in the fact that we don't have to be a carbon copy of somebody else. we can be our own person. I think one of the great challenges in life is to find one's voice. It doesn't come easy. There's a famous quote from the Methodist minister John Wesley, who once preached a sermon on a very famous scripture from one of the Gospels that was a reference to John the Baptist, who it declares was a voice crying in the wilderness. And John Wesley said, every person should strive to be a voice and not an echo. And he proclaimed that or preached that or taught that in the wake of a discovery that in his travels around Britain, preaching this kind of new version of Christianity, this Methodism, that people were transcribing notes from, and remembering things that he said, and then basically just reiterating them. And John Wesley wasn't trying to get everybody to think and say exactly the same thing as him. He was trying to get them to think and say for themselves. And so he said, every person should strive to be a voice and not an echo. And Babitz and Didion are voices. They're creative voices. They're not echoes of each other. In fact, they're in many ways polar opposites of each other, whose lives are intertwined by shared experience, by shared sense of place. And it's undeniable that the place, Los Angeles, was the crucible that gave birth to a particular kind of creativity unique to each of them. And as they wrote, discoveries were made. I think the lesson in all of this for me is that writing, like most creativity, is always first and foremost a medium of discovery. You find your way to something, not out of something. And I'm going to now try and get my way out of this final bit of this recording because I don't know why that just went weird, but it just has. And now I'm kind of stuck. Ah, there you go. And I don't know if I'm still here or if I've gone away. No, I see my camera, but I don't know where I've gone. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conversations. Blessings to you all, as always. And sometime I'll get to see you. Let's hope anyway. Bye for now.